Hello, welcome to my channel and welcome to my website. My name is Daryl and this is Programming in Any Language. The website is www.black-duck.com. It's where you'll find all my videos organized in logical order. Well, welcome to Jagged Arrays. You'll find that they are a bit obscure. In fact, if you research programming textbooks, you'll find that some books give this topic a page or two while the others dismiss the concept entirely. If you research this topic on the internet, you'll find a repeat of the same examples from a variety of different authors. Truth is, almost no one gives us a practical example of why you might want to use a jagged array except for a reference to large amounts of data. Well, that does make sense. However, if any of you out there have a practical example, I'd love to see it. It's always a good idea to have a solid picture of how you might use something. Well, not in this video, but in the one following this video, I did put together a practical example as to how you might use a jagged array. I don't use a lot of data, but I used enough data so that you can understand the concept. But even in my example, I would rather opt for a 2D array. But that's okay. Between this video and the next, I think I put together the clearest explanation of how jagged arrays work. This first video will use the classic example found all over the internet and on most books. The second video will use strings and create an application that actually could be used in the real world. Enough talk. Let's take a look at this thing. We're going to work with another kind of array today. It's called a jagged array. Let me give it to you this way. I've got Murrock's book here. And it's interesting, but they actually explain this. The knowledge you've learned how to work with one- and two-dimensional arrays, you should be aware of another type of array called the jagged array. Jagged arrays let you store data in a table that can have rows of unequal lengths. Each row in a jagged array is stored as a separate array. Because of that, a jagged array is known as an array of arrays. Because jagged arrays are used infrequently, they are not covered in this book. For further information, refer to online documentation. So, this book doesn't even cover it. I've got other books that do cover it. They give it a page, page and a half. That's about it. And the reason for it, it is kind of obscure. It is used. It does have some practical use. It is fairly straightforward, easy to use once you understand arrays. But it's meant to save memory and maybe increase speed. And the trade-offs maybe aren't all that great, but they do exist. And for large amounts of data that you might have, and I'll have a practical example down the road, they may have a decent use. I've never used one in my professional career, but I've used regular two-dimensional arrays, and they work just as fine. In fact, let's take a look at this. If you look at the screen, what I've got here is a jagged versus multiple array kind of screen here, and I've got 3 panels. The first one here, the merit badges, show 4 one-dimensional arrays. There's a Daffy array that has 3 things in it, an Elmer array that has 4 things in it, a Tweety array that has 3 things in it, and a Bugs array that has 2 things in it. So I've set up 4 arrays. Daffy goes camping, boating, and fishing. Elmer goes camping, boating, fishing, and hunting. Tweety goes flying, boating, and fishing. And Bugs goes running and hopping. So those are 4 single-dimensional arrays that are holding the activities these guys use. If we go down to a 2-degree array in the bottom right-hand corner, we can set this up as rows representing Daffy, Elmer, Tweety, and Bugs, 0, 1, 2, and 3. And the columns would represent the activities they might use. In the case of Daffy, he's going camping, boating, and fishing, just like we see over here. And he's got this 4th column, which has nothing in it. But it is used in memory. It does take up that space. Is that a big deal? Probably not. If you have relatively small arrays and memory is fairly cheap, we have lots of memory in computers. Elmer is doing camping, boating, fishing, and hunting. Tweety's doing flying, boating, and fishing. And Bugs is running and hopping. So that's how you work with a 2-dimensional array. You could pop these things in here. And 0, 2 is, fishing for Daffy. 1, 1 is boating for Elmer. You can get at all these things. 0, 3 is Daffy with nothing in it, so he's got nothing to do. And you could easily step through this thing and count the number or list the items that are in here that aren't blank and be able to get a decent watch on this particular thing. Now, if we wanted to go with jagged arrays, we'd set up something like this. The same thing. We have rows here representing Daffy, Elmer, Tweety, and Bugs. But in the case of the columns, each row has its own length. There's separate arrays inside this jagged array piece, the row array. So we've got Daffy with camping, boating, and fishing, and that's it. We can't get to this particular piece here because it doesn't exist. It's not being used in memory. Nothing's been established to put any data in there. So it's saving that memory. Elmer's using the whole boat here. Camping, fishing, boating, hunting. And Tweety, again, he's using 3 and not this part. And Bugs, running and hopping, he's using only a couple of the first 2 elements. He's not using these 3. We're not taking up any memory here. So this has a length of 2. This is length of 3, this is length of 4, this is length of 3 again. So each of these rows has its own length property. That's what makes it different than the single-dimensional array or the two-dimensional array. You can think of it as an array, single-dimensional arrays inside, a bunch of single-dimensional arrays inside an array. That's how you look at it. That sounds very confusing. But let's take a look at this from a practical sense. If you look at a jagged array, it's set up like this. It's a special type of 2D array. Rows in a jagged array can have different lengths. And it's set up like this. Int with 2 sets of brackets here. One is going to be the rows, one's going to be the columns. We give it a name, jagged array, whatever, bozo, whatever you want to call it, and set it up as a new int 3. We're going to be storing integers in here. So we're going to have 3 rows, and we're going to have a number of columns. We don't know how many because all those individual arrays are different. So then we set up jagged array row 0 is going to be a new int containing 4 elements. And we establish it as 1, 2, 3, and 4. Jagged array 1 is going to be a new int with 3. It's going to have 5, 6, and 7 in it. Jagged array 2, row 2, the third one, is going to have a new int 5. It's going to have 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 in it. This is a very, very classical demonstration you're seeing right here. It's in many of the books. It's on the internet. You can find it all over the place. What I had trouble finding was a practical example of an array, so I created my own, which you'll see in the next video. What we've got here is we've got rows 0, 1, and 2, and they look like this, much like you just saw in the previous guy right here, where we had Daffy with all his little pieces in here. To access any element of the array, we use message box I show, and we're looking at row 1, the second row, and item 2, which is the third column, to string, and sending it out there. To assign a value to row 0, 3, we use jagged array 0, 3, and establish the 99 there. It puts 99 in row 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, the third, actually the fourth, but the third, we start with 0, element in the array gets to 99. So it's very easy to establish. Nothing confusing about this at all. You've used nested loops to process jagged arrays, and this is where it may seem to get a little bit confusing. The jagged array has a length property that holds the number of rows. So we have that length. This jagged array with a length tells us how many rows we actually have. Each row also has a length property. It holds a number of columns. So every time we get to a row, we need to find out what that length is in that column, in that particular row, so we can traverse through the rows and stop at the right spot. The following nested loop displays the values of all the jagged array. For it, row 0, row equals jagged array length, row plus plus. So we're looking at the jagged row length. As long as we don't go above that, we're going to be fine. And we start looking at the columns in that row, where we set the column to 0. We say column is less than jagged array row, which is going to be whatever 0 is, or 1 or 2 or 3, and the length of it. So this is telling us what the row length is. So that we don't exceed this, and we look at the column. So we can actually get at all these pieces here, and this message box will show the row column to string and go on that way. I took that classical demonstration and kind of created a little program to actually see this. We'll do this. We'll actually write this thing and take a look at just how it's actually done so we can see it. But basically, you establish the jagged array somewhere in memory, somewhere in your code. I put it up in the global area. And I didn't do any accessing of it until I got down to here, where I'm actually doing a form load, which is going to establish or initialize the array with these values. You've got to initialize the rows or it doesn't work. That's another thing that's kind of confining about this particular piece. And I got an exit button here. So let's take a look at this. It's going to look like this. I'm going to display row 1 and 2. I'm going to have a button that's going to assign 99 to the row. I'm going to loop through all and put them in this list over here so we can see it. And then have a code that's going to exit this thing out. So let's go ahead and write this thing. Okay, and we end up with our classical jagged array 2 sitting in the screen right now. We'll just close up this, make this a little smaller because we're not going to do too much with it. We'll add our toolbox. So we're going to add a couple tools to this thing. What we're going to do, we're going to put our exit button on here. And we'll stick that down here. We'll just call it exit. And we'll give it a font. And we'll give it a bold look to it. And we're going to make it big enough so it kind of extends. Oh, something like that. Maybe a little smaller. Something much like this. And pop it on here. We're also going to put a list box on here, which we're going to stick up here. I think it's a little wider maybe. And this will have the name LBX display. And we'll increase the font on this thing too right away. We're going to have numbers here, so it's not going to be really showing too much, so we can kind of make it small. Doesn't have to be a big deal. We'll make it like this and bring this thing down like this. And that looks good. I want to have a couple buttons in here, so I'm going to use the copy here, and I'm going to lay 3 buttons across the top here. This one is going to be, we know this, well, first of all, we're going to have to accept that this one's going to be button exit. We know that. So BTN exit, BTN EXIT. I guess for this example, we could probably just leave it the way it was, but we're going to do something different to it. We're going to actually go ahead and say something. The top one, what I want to do is I want to be able to display row 1, column 2. And so we're going to call this guy BTN display. Display 1, we'll call it. This particular one, we're going to actually say to it that it is going to become assign 99 to rows 1, 2. Row 1, column 2. Assign 99 to row 1, col 2. And we'll call this thing BTN assign. And finally, this guy right here is going to be called loop through and display all. And we'll call this button display all. We'll format, align their lefts. Vertical spacing will become equal. Leave it like that. And center on form vertically. That looks good. Now we're going to take this guy, and we can actually shrink it down a little bit and make it the same size as these buttons here. We're going to align top, and then bring this guy down a little bit. Oh, I don't want to do that. Stop doing that. Bring it down like this. It kind of looks like the same size as that, and that looks pretty good too. We're not too bad here. We can maybe bring this thing in. Programs always should be neat. You want to kind of keep that in place. So there we go. We got our little program done. We're going to save it, and we got her. Now let's go ahead and write that code and make this thing happen. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my exit button and pop it in here because I can, that'll allow me to get to my code, and it'll also allow me to create the exit button. So I'll double click on this, and there it is. I'll do a // close form, and this .close, and we're done here. We get rid of our toolbox. We don't need it anymore, so we get our code on this thing. Now what we're going to do is in the area right here, the global area, I'm going to create an array of 3 int arrays. That's going to be our jagged array. And I'm going to do that by saying int and put in the double brackets. That tells me that I'm actually creating a jagged array. And I'll call it jagged array. And I'll make it equal to new int. And I'll say I want it to be 3. I'm going to create 3 rows. And who knows how many columns, because each one will be different here. Put a semicolon in there and go ahead and say establish array. That's all I need to do. Now if I want to use this thing, I'm going to go into form load. So I'm going to go down to form load here, and I'm going to double click on the form itself to create a form load process. And here I'm going to put in create each array that is an element of the jagged array. And how do I do that? Well, I use the same name, jagged array, and I say row 0 is going to be equal to this new array, this new int, which is going to have 4 items in it, and I'm going to establish those items or initialize those items with 1, 2, 3, and 4 in it. And then, whoops, there's 4 in it, and then outside here, go ahead and put a semicolon in to finish that thing off. And that sets up row 1, row 0 actually. Repeat it. Jagged array 1 is equal to new int 3, and we just initialize it with 5, 6, 7. Sets up row 1, and jagged array 2, row 2, is equal to new int, this will be 5. Then we'll initialize it with 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. If I didn't put in this, the 12th one here, and put in my semicolon at this point, I'd get an error. And the error would be an array initializer of length 5 is expected. You've got to initialize these things to make it work. So I will put the 5th one in here. And that's a downside of these things. You've got to do all this upfront work to make them actually viable, which to me is a lot of extra work to do this. It's simple to do. It's not hard to do, but on the practicality here, unless you're creating some fixed array that's going to have these numbers in it or these values in it or whatever, and they're going to be huge, there's a lot of work going involved to actually establishing this. This is why I'd rather use the two-dimensional array to actually make this all happen. But it will save space. And when you start processing the rows, you're going one row at a time, it should be faster, considering a lot of data. Considering a little bit of data, you're not going to notice a difference at all. Sets up row 2. And that creates our array. So we're all set there. So now let's go ahead and go to our buttons here. We want to go, the first one we want to do is we want to actually display rows 1 and 2. So we're going to do that by popping in here and just saying message box dot show, and we can say jagged array. We want to look at row 1, second row, and the third item, or number 2 in the column, and display that to string and lay a semicolon on the back of that. And that should work. This should all happen. So let's go ahead and do a file save. Bang, start. The array gets initialized, and bang, we're seeing a 7 in there. So 7 pops into the row 1, column 2 area. Is that true? We got to exit out. Row 1, column 2 is 0, 1, 2. It's a 7. Yes, it is. So let's go ahead and do the assign 99 to row 1, column 2. Let's pop that in there. So go ahead and do this, and we'll go ahead and say jagged array 1, 2 is equal to 99. And we're simply going to assign that 99 there. That's all we need to do here. Do file save, run it. Nothing's broken. It's working here. We can display row 1 and 2, and that's there. Now we'll assign 99 to it, and supposedly 99 is sitting in that cell. How do we know? We'll set this thing up next to actually look at that. So we'll go in here, and we'll go ahead to our array here, and we'll do our loop through and display all, and set that up. And this is where we set up the loop to actually process this thing. So we're going to set something up called for. Oops. We're going to set up a for int. We'll call it row is equal to 0. Row is less than. Notice how it comes up with jagged array length and then a row plus plus. So it's looking at the entire jagged array piece and knows the number of rows we have here. So as long as we don't go beyond that length, we're going to be fine here. And we set up our braces. Whoops. What are we missing here? No, this should be fine. Let me back up here and just brace. Bang. There it is. Now it's in the right spot. Now we'll go for int col equals 0, and col is less than jagged array row dot length col plus plus, and set up our braces. Notice how it's looking at the jagged array row length. So row, the 0 here, or the 1 or the 2 or whatever it's going to be, is going to pop in here. So we're actually interrogating that we're not going to be on that length. When we get to the end of that particular row, we'll know to stop and get out of this loop and go to the next increment row then again, or end. So we'll go down here and we'll simply say lbx display our list box dot items dot add and put in jagged array row and col, and it'll be toString, and it's there. So we actually went ahead and we actually put in the row and the column, and we're setting up toString. This is all we need to do to actually make this thing work. So it's fairly simple to traverse through it. It's confusing if you've never worked with arrays before, but once you've had a lot of experience with two-dimensional arrays, one-dimensional arrays, this working with the length gets to be a little bit easier. It's more understandable when you get to that thing. So it works out pretty well. So I'm going to do a file save, all. We'll do a start. Display rows 1 and 2, it's still a 7. Assign 99 to that. Okay, let's go back and display rows 1 and 2. It's a 99 now. Notice that? Okay, cool. Let's look through all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 99, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So So the display is working out and the loop is working out too. So this particular process is how you would actually go through and work with a jagged array and make it all happen. Is it worth doing? It is if it's got some practical use to it. And you can go through the internet and look for examples of practical use. And I found one where they talked about a movie theater where there are different kiosks. You have a number of kiosks here, but you never know how many tickets are going to be sold in each kiosk. So you'd have a different number going in there. You could set that up to how that's going to be. But you have to know stuff ahead of, beforehand. So I've looked at a practical solution using ingredients in products that you might be finding in the grocery store. And I set up a little program to demonstrate that. And you'll see that in the next video.
Well, that's it. That's how the classic piece goes. It shows you how to set it up, but it really doesn't give you a reason to use one. The next video will help with that. The important thing is that you know how that you need to set up each of the rows and initialize them before you can actually use them. You need to know that before you start thinking about how to use this in an application. And we'll address this in the next video. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to use the website for easy access to all my videos. If you get a chance, of course, please subscribe. That way, you'll be notified when something new is available. We'll see you in the next video. Take care.